Mr. President, let me thank the senator from Wisconsin. Like Wisconsin, Rhode Island has a one-word motto as well. Hers is forward, ours is hope. Together they point the right direction. Mr. President, Americans are dissatisfied. Opinion surveys tell us that only 35% of Americans believe that our country is headed in the right direction. Why this alarming dissatisfaction? We don't have to guess. Popular opinion tells us quite plainly. In a survey taken after the 2016 election, 85% of voters agreed that the wealthy and big corporations are the ones really running the country. That includes 80% of voters who supported Trump. It's not just opinion. Academic studies have looked at Congress and confirmed that the views of the general public have statistically near zero influence here, that we listen to big corporate special interests and their various front groups. Even our Supreme Court is not immune. In a 2014 poll, more respondents believed by 9-1 that our Supreme Court favors corporations over individuals versus vice versa. Even among self-identified conservative Republicans, it was still a 4-1 margin. So hold that thought. The wealthy and powerful corporations control Congress, and people know it. As I give my 200th Time to Wake Up speech, the most obvious fact standing plainly before me is not the measured sea level rise at Naval Station Newport, is not the 400 parts per million carbon dioxide barrier we have broken through in the atmosphere, is not the new flooding maps that coastal communities like Rhode Island's must face, nor is it the West aflame. It is not even the uniform consensus about climate change across universities, national laboratories, scientific societies, and even across our military and intelligence services, who warn us, as Senator Reid indicated, that climate change is fueling economic and social disruption around the world. No, the fact that stands out for me here at number 200 is the persistent failure of Congress to even take up the issue of climate change. One party won't even talk about it. One party in the executive branch is even gagging America's scientists and civil servants and striking the term climate change off of government websites. In the real world, in actual reality, we are long past any question as to the reality of climate change. The fact of that forces us to confront the question, what stymies Congress from legislating or even having hearings? No, I intend to give my remarks. I appreciate the senator's intervention about climate change. What impels certain executive agencies to forbid even the words? Before the Citizens United decision was delivered up by the 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court, a decision, by the way, that deserves a place on the trash heap of judicial history, we were actually doing quite a lot in the Senate about climate change. There were bipartisan hearings. There were bipartisan bills. There were bipartisan negotiations. Senator McCain campaigned for president under the Republican banner on a strong climate platform. What happened? Here's what I saw happen. The fossil fuel industry went over and importuned the Supreme Court for the Citizens United decision. The 5 Republican-appointed judges on the court delivered the Citizens United decision, and the fossil fuel industry was ready and set at the mark when that decision came down. Since the moment of that decision, not one Republican in this body has joined one serious piece of legislation to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Our Senate heartbeat of bipartisan activity was killed dead by the political weaponry unleashed for big special interests by those 5 judges. The fossil fuel industry then made a clever play. They determined to control one party on this question. They determined to silence or punish or remove any dissent in one political party. This created for the fossil fuel industry 2 advantages. First, they got to use that party as their tool to stop climate legislation, and they have. If you remember the movie Men in Black, I would make the analogy that today's Republican Party bears the same relation to the fossil fuel industry as to climate change that the unfortunate farmer in Men in Black bore to the alien who killed him and occupied his skin for the rest of the movie. Complete occupation with nothing left but the skin. The second advantage for the fossil fuel industry is that they could camouflage their own special interest, special pleading as partisanship, and not just the muscle and greed of one very big industry wanting to have its way. That is why we are where we are. That is why talking to Republicans about climate change resembles talking to prisoners about escape. They may want out, but they can't have their fossil fuel wardens find out. Climate change is a prime example of how our institutions are failing in plain view of the American people. Small wonder the public holds Congress in low esteem and thinks we don't listen to them. Frankly, it's amazing that there's any shred of esteem remaining, given our behavior. Congress remains a democratic body on the surface with all the procedural veneer and trappings of democracy. We hold votes, and there are caucuses and hearings. But on the issues, like climate change, that most concern the biggest special interests, Congress no longer provides America a truly functioning democracy. Underneath the illusory democratic surface run subterranean rivers of dark money. Massive infrastructures have been erected to hide that dark money flow from the sunlight of public scrutiny, to carve out subterranean caverns through which the dark money flows. If you want to understand why we do nothing on climate, you have to look down into those subterranean chambers, understand the dark money, and not be fooled by the surface spectacle. And of course, it's not just the spending of dark money that's the problem. Once you let unlimited money loose in politics, particularly once you let unlimited dark money loose in politics, you empower something even more sinister than massive anonymous political expenditures. You empower the threat of massive anonymous political expenditures, the sinister, whispered threat. Once you let a special interest spend unlimited dark money, you necessarily let it threaten or promise to spend that money. Those sinister threats and promises will be harder to detect even than the most obscured dark money expenditures. You may not know who's behind a big dark money expenditure, but at least you'll see it. You'll see the smear ads. You may not know what's up, but you'll know something's up. But a threat, a couple of people, a back room, and a silent handshake, that's enough. If you give a thug a big enough club, he doesn't even have to use it to get his way. This is the great insidious evil of Citizens United. And this, I believe, is why we are where we are. The Senate in the Gilded Age was described as having senators who didn't actually represent states, but, and I quote here, principalities and powers in business. One senator represents the Union Pacific Railway system, another the New York Central, still another the insurance interests of New York and New Jersey. So we cannot pretend that it is impossible for the United States to be disabled and corrupted by special interests. Our history refutes that thought. So we need to keep our guard up as Americans. against corrupting forces. And this unlimited dark flow of money into our politics is a corrupting force. Congress's embarrassing and culpable failure to act on climate change is one face of a coin. Turn it over, and the obverse of that coin is corruption exactly as the Founding Fathers knew it. The public good ignored for special interests wielding power. In this case, the power of money. Climate failure, dark money. Dark money, climate failure. Two sides of the same evil coin. And if that thought's not cheerful enough, wait, there's more. There's the phony science operation that gives rhetorical cover to the dark money political muscle operation. This phony science operation is a big effort, with dozens of well-funded front groups participating, supported by bogus think tanks, well described as the think tank as disguised political weapon. Today's phony science operation has a history. It grew out of the early phony science operation run by the tobacco industry, which was set up to create doubt among the public that cigarettes were bad for you. How'd that work out? Well, I'll tell you how. That effort was so false, so evil, that it was determined in court to be fraud, a massive corporate-led fraud. After the tobacco fraud apparatus was exposed, it didn't disappear, it morphed into an even more complex apparatus to create false doubt about climate science. The goal, exactly like the tobacco company's fraud, is to create something that looks enough like science to confuse the public, but which has the perverse purpose to defeat and neutralize real science. It is a science denial apparatus. And by the way, this fossil fuel-funded science denial apparatus has some big advantages over real science. First, the science denial apparatus has unlimited money behind it. The IMF has put the subsidy of the fossil fuel industry at $700 billion per year in the United States alone. To defend a $700 billion annual subsidy, you can spend enormous amounts of money. So money is no object. Second, the science denial apparatus doesn't waste time with peer review, the touchstone of real science. Slap a lab coat on a hack and send them to the talk shows. That's enough. The science denial apparatus is public relations dressed up as science. So it behaves like public relations and goes straight to its market, an inexpert public, to work its mischief. Third, they have the advantage of Madison Avenue tacticians to shape their phony message into appealing sound bites for the public. Have you read a scientific journal lately? The Madison Avenue message gets through a lot more sharply. Fourth, the science denial apparatus doesn't need to stop lying when it's caught. As long as they're getting their propaganda out, the truth doesn't matter. This is not a contest for truth. It's a contest for public opinion. So debunked zombie arguments constantly rise from the earth and walk again. And finally, they don't have to win the argument. They just have to create the illusion, the false illusion, that there is a legitimate argument. Then, the political muscle those 5 justices gave this industry can go to work. I would like to suggest, 200 speeches in, that it's time we stopped listening to the industry that comes to us bearing one of the most flagrant conflicts of interest in history. It's time we stopped listening to their fraudulent science denial operation. It's time we put the light of day on this creepy dark money operation and stopped listening to its threats and promises. If we're going to stop listening to all of that, Who should we listen to? How about Pope Francis, who called climate change one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our day? How about the scientists whom we pay, hundreds of them across our government, whose salaries our appropriators are funding right now, and who, under President Trump, released this report? Under President Trump. This report says there is, and I quote, no convincing alternative explanation for what it calls global, long-term, and unambiguous warming and record-breaking climate-related weather extremes. It is our human activity. Or how about listening to our intelligence services, whose national threat assessment, issued under President Trump, signed by our former colleague, the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, it actually has a chapter entitled Environment and Climate Change. Here are the identified consequences in that report: humanitarian disasters, conflict, water and food shortages, population migration, labor shortfalls, price shocks, and power outages. And most dangerously, the prospect of, and I quote our National Intelligence Worldwide Threat Assessment here, the prospect of tipping points in climate-linked Earth systems that can create abrupt climate change. Or how about listening to Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump and Eric Trump and the Trump Organization in 2009 when they took out this full-page ad in the New York Times saying the science of climate change was irrefutable and its consequences would be catastrophic and irreversible. Donald J. Trump, chairman and president. Where'd that guy go? Or how about listening to our own home state universities? Every one of us can go home to Ole Miss or Ohio State, to the University of Alaska or LSU, to Utah State or West Virginia University or Texas A&M. We can each go home to our home state's state university, and they don't just accept climate change, they teach it. They teach it. Or, if you can listen quietly, you can listen to the oceans. They speak to us, the oceans do. They speak to us through thermometers, and they say, we're warming. They speak to us through tide gauges, and they say, we're rising along your shores. They speak to us through the howl of hurricanes powered up by their warmer sea surfaces. They speak to us through the quiet flight of fish species from their traditional grounds as the seawater warms beyond their tolerance. If we know how to listen through simple pH tests, the oceans will tell us that they are acidifying. The oceans will tell us that they are beginning to kill their own corals and oysters and pteropods. Or we could go out and check and see the corals and the oysters and the pteropods corrode and die before our eyes. It's happening. The fishermen who plow the ocean surface can speak for the oceans. As one Rhode Islander said to me, Sheldon, it's getting weird out there. This is not my grandfather's ocean, said another. He'd grown up trawling with his granddad on those waters. And it's not just oceans. I went out on Lake Erie with seasoned professional fishermen who told me everything they'd learned in a lifetime on the lake was useless because the lake was changing on them so unknowably fast. Mr. President, we choose here in Congress to whom we're going to listen. And it's time we started to listen to the honest voices and the true voices. If you don't like environmentalists or scientists, listen to your ski industry. Listen to your fishermen and lumbermen. Listen to your gardeners and birders and hunters. Listen to those who know the earth and the oceans and who can speak for the earth and the oceans. It is an evil mess we are in. And if there is any justice in this world, there will one day be a terrible price to pay if we keep listening to evil voices. The climate change problems we are causing by failing to act are a sin, as Pope Francis has flatly declared. But that's not the only sin. To jam Congress up, fossil fuel interests are interfering with and corrupting American democracy. And to corrupt American democracy is a second and a grave sin. The science denial apparatus to mount a fraudulent challenge to the very enterprise of science, that is a third grave sin. And perhaps worst of all is that the world is watching. It is watching us as the fossil fuel industry, its creepy billionaires, its front groups, its bogus think tanks, all gang up and debauch our democracy. From John Winthrop to Ronald Reagan, we have held America up as a city on a hill with the eyes of the world upon us. From Daniel Webster to Bill Clinton, we have spoken of the power of our American example as greater in the world than any example of our power. Lady Liberty in New York Harbor holds her lamp up to the world, representing our American beacon of truth, justice, and democracy. I have a distinct memory, Mr. President, traveling with our friend John McCain to Manila and waking up early in the morning to go visit our American military cemetery. The sun coming up over the rows of white gravestones standing over our dead. The massive, gleaming marble arcade of names carved on walls stretching high, high over my head, of the Americans whose bodies were never recovered. Over 17,000 in all remembered in that cemetery. After their sacrifice, after the accomplishments of the greatest generation, can we not do better than to sell our democracy to the fossil fuel industry? What do you suppose a monument to that would look like, I wonder? America deserves better, Mr. President, and the world is watching us. We, this city on a hill. With gratitude to the many colleagues who have joined me today, I yield the floor.